I've been accused a lot lately of being an alarmist. Some people will say, "Well, you're irresponsibly engendering fear." But I will say right now that if you are not scared to death, then you're the problem. I'm not the problem. If nuclear war and the prospects of nuclear war don't scare you, um, I don't know why you're here in this forum, and I don't know um, what you're trying to accomplish. There literally is no other issue today. No other issue today. I'm going to just emphasize that again because I know people out there feel strongly about very many other issues. There's no other issue today that's more important than preventing a nuclear war, and we almost had one last week. I don't know how, if people don't understand, Keir Starmer brought with him the documents, the target list. If Joe Biden had signed off on those documents, the target list, part of that target list would have been executed that night. British technicians are already in Ukraine loading target data onto the Storm Shadow missiles. These missiles right now are being used against targets in Novorossiya, in the former Ukrainian provinces of Lugansk, Kherson, Donetsk, and Zaporizhia. Um, why? Because Ukraine, and again, it's right to say they say this is our territory. Okay. Crimea, they say it's our territory. Okay. That's why Russia is not responding by threatening nuclear war when Storm Shadow missiles are used against those targets. This is a a debatable point. Russian territory, however, outside of those five named areas, is Russian territory. It's sovereign territory, unquestionably sovereign territory. And any effort to use um, NATO provided weapons, and it's not just NATO provided weapons, it's NATO targeted weapons. As Dennis said, this isn't about just saying, okay, we'll fire a Storm Shadow off. What's the difference between that and any other weapon system Ukraine has? Ukraine has had very good success using long range drone systems and striking targets deep inside Russia. What's the difference between a Ukrainian drone system and a British or American provided missile? The Ukrainian drone system is a Ukrainian weapon system directed by the Ukrainian government, and Russia will hold the Ukrainian government to account using whatever means it chooses to do so. Um, this is the nature of conflict between uh, two nations, and Russia and Ukraine are in a state of advanced conflict. Ukraine thinks of it as a war. Russia calls it a special military operation. That's a matter of semantics. They are in conflict with one another. NATO claims not to be a party to this conflict. And yet, when NATO provides weapon systems that can only strike targets when the targets have been processed by NATO only entities, that's what people need to understand here. It's not just a matter of programming a Storm Shadow missile. There is an element in Europe, part of NATO, that absorbs American intelligence information, overlays it with American mapping information, and turns it into the data necessary to strike a target. That data is loaded into the Storm Shadow. Because the Storm Shadow communicates with GPS, it doesn't do it on a commercial GPS signal. That's just that's just a single channel. It can be jammed. It does it using the military channels. That's two channels. They're encrypted. They're encrypted by the United States using American encryption technology that has to be loaded into the systems by Americans, not by Ukrainians. Ukrainians are not cleared to operate this level of cryptographic keying material. So when a Storm Shadow is fired against a target inside Russia, it is literally being targeted by NATO. NATO is approving of the target and facilitating the use of this weapon system against the target. That means that NATO is a literal party to the conflict. And yet Keir Starmer wanted Joe Biden to sign off on this, to say, allow us to use this American intelligence so that we can strike targets inside Ukraine using the Storm Shadow missile. This is an act of war, and it's something that, had Keir Starmer signed off on, would have been implemented that night. It's not something that's going to happen down the road. It would have happened that night, Friday the 13th. And on Saturday the 14th, we would all have been dead. That's the point I'm trying to make here, people. It's not a joke. It's not a game. The Russians are not bluffing. Vladimir Putin made this clear on Thursday when it became evident that the United States was having this meeting with Starmer in the White House. And he basically said that if you do this, you will be a party to the conflict, and Russia will have to act accordingly. Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson, reiterated this point. He said the president has made this quite clear, but not clear enough, because they still had the meeting. On Friday, the UN ambassador, or the Russian ambassador to the United Nations, in front of the Security Council in session, reiterated this point, that it will be a declaration of war if the United States and Great Britain enable Ukraine to use NATO-provided weapons to strike Russia. The Russian ambassador to the United States took it a step further. Anatoly Antonov said, if you think that a nuclear conflict will be limited to Europe, basically acknowledging that if this happens, Russia will use nuclear weapons against Europe. If you're an American and you think it will be limited to Europe, think again. We will strike you. You're playing with fire. Don't let your fingers get burned. Now, when he said this, it sent shockwaves through the American community. Former government officials, and if you know anything about how the establishment works, we have a whole host of former government officials who advise, who are in have connectivity with the current administration. They called Anatoly Antonov, and you have to ask yourself, why didn't the government call? Because we don't have connectivity with the Russians anymore. I was at the Russian embassy on Friday night. I was there at the invitation of Anatoly Antonov. I was there to attend a concert performance, a piano concert performance of Rimsky-Korsakov and other Russian composers, as part of Anatoly Antonov's effort to demonstrate to the American people the culture of Russia, to help detangle the Russophobia that has spun its web around the Americans. I've never seen the ambassador so distracted and so concerned. This was his big moment. He has been working for months to bring this concert in, to make this demonstration. And yet at this moment, his mind was elsewhere. And now I know where his mind was. He was uncertain whether or not he would live the day. He was uncertain what the United States would do. He had done his duty in articulating this, though, to the various former government administration who called the Biden administration and said, he's not bluffing. This is as real as it gets. If you sign this document, we will be at war with Russia, and the war will be a nuclear war. I don't know if you guys are hearing what I'm saying. We all almost died on Saturday. If you read Annie Jacobson's wonderful book, Nuclear War: A Scenario, it's a work of fiction, but it was written after consulting with former nuclear war planners, people who were in the system, who understood how nuclear war is fought. They understand how things are going. You know how long it takes for the world to end in a nuclear conflict? From start to finish, from the beginning of the initiation of events that lead to the first launch of a nuclear weapon, until all life on Earth is forever destroyed, either instantly or things have been set in motion for the long lingering death. 72 minutes. That's all it takes, ladies and gentlemen. 72 minutes. What are we going to do about this? This is the existential question of our time. What are we going to do about this? I think most people that are in attendance here share my fear, my concerns about the danger of nuclear war. But Joe Biden's not done. As Dennis Small said, he is going to meet with Zelensky at the United Nations General Assembly debate, where they're going to talk about how to make this happen. What is needed to make this happen? The European Parliament, as Dennis said we want this to happen. Why? Because Europe believes that Russia is bluffing. Europe believes that Putin is bluffing. Europe doesn't believe that Russia would pull the trigger. I've been studying Russia my entire life. First as the Soviet Union, later in the decade of the 90s, and I've been watching Vladimir Putin very closely for 25 years. I've had the privilege of visiting Russia twice in the last year. I would have gone a third time, but the U.S. government stopped it. One of the reasons why they stopped it is because of the insights that I have gained by visiting Russia and speaking with Russians, Russian officials, Russian military officers, etc. I will say this: Russia doesn't bluff. Russia understands what war is more than anybody in the West does. Russia understands the sacrifices necessary to sustain a nation in times of existential crisis. And the Russians are not willing to allow NATO, the United States, or any of its proxies to put the Russian state at risk, to put the Russian nation at risk. And allowing Ukraine to use long-range NATO-provided systems targeted by NATO isn't just an extension of the Ukrainian warfighting capability. It gives NATO a preemptive strike capability. This is what people don't understand. Because if NATO can use Ukrainian weapons to take out strategic targets inside Russia, and then follow that up with a NATO strike, conventional in nature, designed to decapitate Russian leadership, and then follow that up with a wave of low-yield nuclear weapons, which are now integrated into the American arsenal and a part of our nuclear employment plan. I don't know how many people understand that the former commander of United States Strategic Command, in speaking to Congress, said, "I prefer preemptive nuclear strike." Listen to what I'm saying. I prefer preemptive nuclear strike. That's his preferred way of doing war. Preemptive nuclear strike. And now you're a Russian listening to that, and you're watching NATO and the United States give Ukraine the ability to launch the first wave of preemptive action under the guise that it's just Ukraine, paralyzing the Russians so that the second wave, a NATO wave, comes in, decapitates, followed by a preemptive nuclear strike. And you're the Russians saying, what do we do about this? And what they do is they say we have to draw a line. And the line has been drawn. They are not bluffing. This is existential in nature. We have an election coming up in the United States. It's turning out to be one of the most important elections of our time, not because of abortion, not because of immigration, not because of the economy, not because of anything that everybody else is talking about, but because if we make it to the election, because there's a good chance we won't. There's a good chance we won't make it to next week. There's a good chance we won't make it to tomorrow, depending on decisions that are being made. But if we make it to the election, the person we elect is going to be the person that is either going to take us into World War III, a general nuclear strike, or is going to resolve the issue. Right now, there's only one candidate that's injecting the threat of nuclear war into the political debate. And that, of course, is Donald Trump. There's a lot of people out there that say they could never vote for Donald Trump. That's your prerogative. But if you don't want to vote for Donald Trump, at least exploit the fact that he's injected something into the political debate and make your candidate of choice respond. We have to inject a discussion about the dangers of nuclear war into the American political debate at this election. It must become the existential issue of this election. No other issue matters, because if there is a nuclear war and we're all dead, no other issue matters. We can't solve the issues of abortion, immigration, the economy, and other things else if there is no country, if there is no world. We have to stop this nuclear war. We all almost died last week. And again, I just want to make that point. If it weren't for some brave statements made by Russian government officials, from the president to the two ambassadors, Biden would have signed off on Keir Starmer's documents. Storm Shadow missiles would have been launched against targets inside Russia, and Russia would have responded, beginning the cycle of escalation that leads to a general nuclear conflict. We need to inject sanity into the political discourse. We need to put pressure on Jill Stein to respond to the op-ed that was written by RFK Jr. and Donald Trump Jr. and published in the Hill magazine, which put on the table for the first time from a campaign the necessity of negotiating into the conflict of Ukraine and linking the conflict in Ukraine to the danger of nuclear war, because they are linked. We need Jill Stein to commit. We need Kamala Haris to commit. We need this to become a political issue. And once it becomes a political issue, that puts pressure on the Biden administration not to engage in any precipitous activity that would generate a nuclear conflict. On 28 September, we're having a rally in Kingston, New York. It's the beginning of what I call Operation Dawn. Operation Dawn are just 4 simple questions I ask the American people. What will you be willing to do to save democracy, to save America, to save the world by making your vote count in November? And what you need to do is just that. Make your vote count. Don't give your vote away. Make a candidate earn your vote. And the issue that you need to emphasize for them to earn is, what is their strategy for preventing a nuclear war? What is their strategy for bringing about peace with Russia? What is their strategy for promulgating disarmament, reintroducing disarmament into the political dialogue between Russia and the United States? Right now, only one side has put something out there. We need all sides to do. We need this to become a matter of national discussion, national debate, and then and only then might we dodge this bullet. Thank you very much for letting me speak.